Hey, Tatooine Sons family, this is David. You may have noticed we're trying some things a little bit different right now. We know that a lot of the topics that we discuss are spoilers. Pretty much everything we discuss is spoilers. And so if you haven't seen a movie that we are discussing in our main episode or a TV series, you haven't watched the latest episode, then you may be skipping the entire episode because you don't want to get spoiled. And that stinks for you and that stinks for us too. So we thought, wouldn't it be cool to break up our segments into smaller episodes so you could go and listen to the pieces that you won't get spoiled in? And so that is what we're doing. We're releasing each of our main topics in smaller individual episodes that last between 10 and 15, sometimes a little longer because Sam's segment always goes longer. Anyway, today's episode is our conversation about that riveting address given by Kino Loy in episode 10 of Andor, along with one of our patented dad moment segments from this week's show. So check it out. So curious, how hard was it now that we can fully discuss this? How hard was it waiting several weeks between episodes now for us, new episodes, since we got to watch these a couple weeks ago before with the screeners that we were sent, which was awesome, amazing. Mm-hmm. But then waiting and then having to kind of remember what we talked about and didn't talk about and not spoiling stuff and all of that. What was that like?
Yeah, it makes me respect the actors who have to go through a million different interviews and can't say anything spoilery.
I understand Dave and his panels now and how satisfied he was after season 4 of Rebels. That panel, he was just like, I can finally talk now. I get it. We understand now, not even to the same extent that he did, but we get just the little bit of what he had to go through.
Yeah, and it was also pretty amazing to be able to go to those roundtable interviews with
that was awesome.
The sound designer, the visual designer, the special effects designer, and then the executive producer and
the
writer of this episode.
It was great.
Of that arc was amazing. Let's talk a little bit about I want to focus in on, because again, we mentioned it in the teaser to the segment, but for me, this episode is all about Andy Serkis's character.
Yeah, 100%.
With it. And I know a lot of people are just absolutely thrilled with Luthen Rail and his ending to this episode, which was fantastic as well. And I've watched this episode 4 times now.
Goodness.
I've only seen it twice.
And it's phenomenal, but I'm just fixed on Andy Serkis's performance in this. And throughout the Narkina 5 arc, as we think about Kino Loy, he's sort of worn a mask of confidence, and he carries it forward into the way that he speaks to the prisoners under his charge. He orders them around with a raised voice and very firm resolve. But then when the prison breakout reaches its most critical moment, he actually loses confidence, and he seems very weakened by everything that happened around him at that point. Nate, what's happening from your perspective inside of Kino Loy in this moment that sort of steals his voice from him?
I think it's a combination of just, he's been there for we don't know how long, and he's been working for so long, and it's just the fact that this plan worked and they're finally at that moment, and I don't think he actually believed he would get to that point. And then at that point, he just has to think, he's like, I can't get out of here. He can't swim, so he had to think of how to lead these other people into the place that he can't go to. And so that was definitely a big part of it.
I think it's also just a major change in the norm for him. I mean, like you said, he's been doing this for who knows how long. It's the same routine every single day, basically. I'm one who I do enjoy a good routine.
Yeah, me too.
Where everything's just the same every day. Like, I would almost probably be fine eating at the same place every day too. I probably wouldn't get tired of it.
When that college student,
when that routine is taken away or changed, it throws me off big time. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine what Kino Loy would be going through in this moment too. And he has
he found his safety in that routine.
Right.
His security was in that routine.
I mean, he had a pseudo position of authority in his routine. And when that moment happened, I mean, there was no leader or authority anymore. Everybody was just out for themselves to get out of there. So it was a complete 180 shift for his world.
You know, going back to the end of episode 9 and really all through episode 9, Cassian is constantly asking Kino Loy to tell him how many guards on each level, on each level. And then when he finds out, what's the name of the guy that dies? We had it.
Olaf.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Olaf. That's right. When Olaf dies, it's kind of like how many guards on each level, and he says without any hesitation, 12.
Never more
than 12. Right. Okay, that's it. Do you think that in his mind, for however long he'd been in that prison, which could have been decades at this point, we don't know, that he'd been thinking through how to escape this time himself and counting those guards and trying to process it, and now he's standing in this moment and it's actually happening?
I think that'd be natural for anyone to just kind of do. I mean, you got to find some way to pass the time. What better than to figure out how you break out of prison? So yeah, I think he definitely considered that.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because Kino pauses at one point very early on in his address to the prisoners, and he looks over at Cassian, and it's then that Cassian kind of challenges him, saying, "Is that all you've got?" From this moment on, the Kino Loy who has kept himself and the men under his charge safe inside of this prison, he now returns. That one that has lost his voice is now back, and he gives very clear orders to the men, and it begins to build and crescendo. The remainder of this speech is absolutely riveting, and then it climaxes with the mantra "one way out," which we guessed
was going to be the
title. It was. The truth is, really, it's all the more impactful. You kind of alluded to this a second ago, or mentioned this briefly a second ago, BB Nate, but it's a lot more impactful when you realize that the one way out that Kino is leading the men to pursue, he knows it isn't going to work for him. He can't swim. When he's saying that, does Kino Loy fully realize, or at least what do you think, Sam? Does he realize that when he commands the prisoners to make their escape, that he's not going to escape with them?
I think in that moment, he probably pushed that doubt to the back of his mind, probably just under the guise of, well, I'll figure something out. That doesn't matter right now. What matters is getting that point. We'll deal with one thing at a time. So he just kind of like suppresses it for a minute, and then when he gets to the place where they all entered, right, and he realized there really is no other way out, that it finally dawned on him. But it didn't matter in that moment. He was focused on getting everybody else out. His own personal doubts and concerns were secondary to all the prisoners that he was in charge of. He still had he probably still felt responsible for them, and in that moment, that was what he needed to do for the men under his charge.
Yeah, I mean, I said it earlier, I think he did know about it, because like you said, he's probably been planning a way to escape for so long, and this is the only way he could, and so he knew about it. But I think that at that moment, he knew that all of these people matter more than just him, and he's been leading people this entire time, so might as well lead them to freedom, because that's what he can do at that point.
He could have very well commanded everybody to take up arms and find another way out, fight your way to a ship, or maybe there's some underground tunnel, but that wouldn't have been as surefire, I bet, and more people would have probably been killed.
Right, so he had to tell them a way that he knew he couldn't go, which was,
there's a moment that I haven't really heard discussed much since this episode was released. But there's this shot while the scenes keep cutting to the prisoners in their cells while Kino's doing his speech. Right. And there's this moment where you see this specific prisoner, and they keep coming back to this specific prisoner.
That's the night shift.
I think you're right with that. And he hears Kino's description of the situation, and then he stands up. He's in his cell, and he stands up, but you can tell he's kind of hesitant to step out onto the floor in fear that it's still electrified. Right. And he's going to die when he does it. And then he hears Kino say, the floors are safe, or whatever. I don't remember the exact line, but anyway. And it's that point where he kind of takes his own step of faith, and he realizes that what he's hearing is true. And then you start to see this resolve come over him as he's leading others in the cell block to their freedom. I think it's really powerful. BB Nate, why do you think that Kino Loy's words brought the prisoners in the whole scene, not just him, but others, brought them to action?
Because I think that it being like Sammy said, it was out of the routine for all of these people. And so hearing that probably made them listen more. And at that point, they were desperate for just any sign of hope. And so one person took that step of faith, and then everybody else learned that they could do it too. And so it kept kind of like a butterfly effect to everybody. And so everyone started to lead out. And so Kino Loy and his words and his amazing speech helped all of these prisoners kind of just learn, okay, this is fine. And then, other people helping the people on the floors and leading them to a better place was important too. And so all of that was a big deal, especially.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps too that Kino Loy was one of the leaders, right? His words have more authority just as is. The people needed a strong voice to lead them, right? I think had he continued on the way he did at the beginning of his speech, I doubt many people would have really followed through with it.
Which is kind of why Cassian challenges him.
Right.
Yeah.
And once he finally, he finds his resolve and starts addressing the prisoners in that regard, everybody's like, oh, he means this. This is actually happening.
Exactly.
And then they begin to take action.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit with a throwing a dad moment here.
I am your father.
For a show called Andor, about Cassian Andor. It's interesting that we spent most of this segment talking about somebody else with this. It's been that way in a lot of the conversations about this series. But that's one of the most compelling characteristics of Cassian. He leads without being upfront. Some of the very words spoken by Kino Loy in his address to the prisoners when he says, I'd rather die trying to take them down than giving them what they want, were actually first spoken to him by Cassian.
Right.
And it's the same thing that happens when Jyn Erso in Rogue One, she says that famous line she uses before the rebellion leadership when she says rebellions are built on hope. Cassian Andor is the one that said that to her with that. So he inspires others to lead, but it's not really through his own rousing speeches. It's through one-on-one conversations that end up changing the galaxy with this. And there's a really important lesson in that. You never know when a few words said in private to someone else can end up changing the world. So the lesson from that is choose your words wisely with that. And while episode 10 felt very much like a season finale, there are actually still 2 more episodes of season 1 of Andor coming, one tomorrow. And I'm not sure that they can top what they've already gotten, but I'm excited to see them try with that. So before Andor hit our TV screens, I want to say the silver screen or theaters, but we can't do that with Andor, can we? It was suggested by some that there weren't any Easter eggs in that series. Tony Gilroy actually hit back on this, explaining that there are plenty of Easter eggs in it, but that they are the kind that you actually have to be paying attention to see in the film or the show. Again, I'm a movie guy. Anyway, there are so many in this series, but my favorite might be this speech when Kino Loy repeats Cassian's words verbatim, kind of in the same way that Jyn Erso did in Rogue One. I love it. Thanks for checking out this short segment of our full Tatooine Sons episode this week. If you missed any of the other segments on this week's show, you can find those in our podcast feed. And of course, you can hear even more on the main show, like our Is It Canon segment or our Movie Moments segments. And that released earlier this week. So make sure if you haven't listened and you want to, you can check it out. Be sure to follow us on all the socials at Tatooine Sons. Yes, we're still on Twitter as of right now at this recording. I think Twitter still exists. That's Sons with an O. So Tatooine Sons with an O. And as always,
May the Force be with you.